Do you still have that frame with all of your business cards from MBR?
I do.
So Frank has a frame that has like 16 different business cards because he had 16 different titles while he was at MBR. And you can see on it really clearly that almost none of them are taking him up the hierarchy. They're all like sideways where people were just trying to find ways to get Frank the F out of the way. So actually we'll probably come back to that frame multiple times in this episode, especially some of the more specifics of the Peter principle of how people hid Frank like a game of like shell game in New York City with a quarter.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Matthews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch!
We're back.
We
We're
are
back. Frank, it looks like you got power in your house now. You got power back?
I got power back.
We've had a nice string of thunder showers here. Been messing with the grid in Virginia. Frank's been on end of days in his house lately.
So for those of you that don't know Ian and us personally, and my guess is by our listenership, there aren't many of you, but in case you actually never met either Ian or me, neither of us is struggling to find where our next meal comes from. I told Ian the other day, I came home from work and my wife, like I got 2 kids under 3. I got the whole house is set up. There's flashlight. The power was out. There's flashlights and like all kinds of stuff. And like, the first thing I thought about is I text my wife. I'm like, what are we doing about dinner? And she's like, I got dinner solved. I'm like, all right, what's the plan? She texted me. It was like, it was a fine plan. So she was going to use the gas on the stovetop and make some dinner. So I texted Ian the next day. Like I got home and for some reason, I just decided like, I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. Like the power might not be on for days, even though it was on like 3 blocks from the house. So I ended up eating. I texted Ian, I ate like a refugee. And Ian goes, refugees are broke. They don't eat a lot. I'm like, no, like I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. Like the power had actually come on halfway through dinner. And I just kept eating burritos just in case the power went back out.
The end is near. Power's out.
It
takes like 3 days for a society to go into complete anarchy if the power grid was completely lost. And it took Frank 3 minutes to start eating his kids' mac and cheese and stealing both of his toddlers' food. He's ripping it off to just.
My wife looks at me and goes, "Did you eat the entire skillet?" I'm like, "Yep." Sure did.
I was giggling though when you said it because eating like a refugee, I just didn't know what that meant. I'm like, does that mean you ate a lot? Does that mean that you starved yourself because the power was out? Leaning towards you ate a lot, knowing you, but I needed you to actually kind of tell me what.
It's always my default. This in no way has anything to do with what we're talking about today, but we thought it was a funny story. Just like this is a funny story. Last week, Ian and I have been away. Ian was in Greece. I was away last week with some high school friends hiking. And one of my buddies who has a body that is not enviable at all. Like he's not fit. Like
he's rotund.
He's constantly eating chicken wings. He eats chicken wings at every meal. Like he eats like I do when the power goes out constantly. And he started leaning into me and giving me some dietary advice. And I like stopped and looked at him and I go, hold on a minute. Are you under some illusion that I want to look more like you?
Frank goes, I had I hit rock bottom. I got some diet advice from Murph. It's amazing. So Frankie, we've had a 3-week break. I am super excited to be recording again, and we are kicking back off with the Peter Principle, which is a book that was written by Dr. Laurence Peter in 1968, and it was written as satire. It was written as a joke. And the whole concept of the book is that everyone has a ceiling, and if you wait long enough, you're going to hit your ceiling at some point. And his observation is that employees rise up through a firm's hierarchy by being promoted until they reach a level of respective incompetence. And that is where they stay, screwing things up and not doing much of anything for the rest of their career. And he wrote it as a joke. It's a hilarious book. And what's fascinating is it's become a serious management book. Very quickly, it became popular. And the Peter Principle is something that in most companies, people have been around long enough, people talk about. If someone is just kind of lingering around like a bad odor in a position and not doing much, they've reached their Peter Principle. They've petered out. His whole concept is every position in a given company will eventually be filled by employees who are incompetent to fulfill the jobs of their respective positions, which, pretty dire, pretty negative. And I think you got to look no further than this podcast for proof of this concept. I mean, I feel like you and I have absolutely reached our peak level of incompetence by trying to do a podcast.
We have not recorded a podcast in like 6 weeks. And Ian's like, I hope we haven't lost our ability to podcast. I'm like, I don't know if we ever had it. I mean, to show you that we've
been incompetent from episode 1.
For sure. In addition to that, like to show you that I've hit my Peter Principle, I've never read the book. So I just like right off the bat, I just want to put that out there. I've reached my Peter Principle with the Peter Principle.
100%. But you did read all of the book reviews that I sent you on it. So that was good.
I've scanned them. I scanned them.
And as incompetent you are, you waited until just before for me to read them to you because God forbid you do any prep for one of our episodes.
I mean, why would I?
That would show competency and that might get you promoted again. You want to stay right where you're at as a co-host of a podcast.
What I've learned is no good deed goes unpunished. Anytime I show initiative, someone just wants me to do it again.
You're afraid I might say, great job, Frank, do the next outline.
Write another agenda.
Then you'd be screwed.
Like my brother-in-law on his first date with his wife, my sister-in-law, like they've been married like 12 years. His first date, he made her a ham sandwich. That was their date. That was like setting the bar really low.
I mean, the guy's got a plan. I like it.
Incredible.
So there's been a lot. It's the entire cartoon strip. Scott Adams became a multimillionaire writing Dilbert. And in essence, Scott Adams has been quoted as saying the whole Dilbert principle is based on the fact that people are promoted to management positions to get them out of the workflow, to get them out of the way. So his entire, he did that strip for 15, 20 years, highly successful comic strip based basically on the Peter Principle loosely. That's what Dilbert is based on. And so I can tell you from having worked in 2 very large companies that my experience is incredibly consistent with everything that Dr. Peters wrote in this book. I've seen every chapter. I have seen it live. I've seen it work. And I think one of the big reasons for it is just most people won't turn down a promotion, especially if it comes with greater pay, greater prestige, even when they know they're unqualified, even when they know they don't have the skills for that job. When you are promoted, something triggers in you, some stitch of pride triggers in you that I'm being trusted, I'm growing. And I think there's also a fear of most people of becoming stagnant. So if I'm offered a promotion, I turn it down, I'll never get offered this again. And I think that companies are filled with people who probably knew they shouldn't have taken that last promotion, but did anyway because of money, power, prestige, and a fear of going backwards in their career.
I think scarcity plays into it a little bit. They think like, if I don't take this now, I'm never going to get it. So there's a part of that. And I also think it's kind of like you go and you look at the Washington Monument in DC. There's a permanent mark on that monument because that's when the Civil War broke out. It was half built and they didn't get back to it for like 12 years. And when they finally got back to it, like the stone in the quarry looked different. So it looks, there's a line, it's there forever. It's almost like you can measure when certain people were promoted based upon what's happening in the economy. When the economy is really, really strong there's this like usually like flight of weakness into management. But the people who make it through the next recession and that are still there, those are some of the better ones. So you notice there's this bloat in companies with even at the rank and file all the way through management when the economy is strong, because you have a bodies problem. But
That's interesting. That's interesting when you think about that. I love the quarry example, because if you go look at like a resume, most resumes, someone got to a position and they stayed there from 2008 to 2015, or they had 6 different companies they worked for between 2008 and 15. There's kind of one of two things you find, but there are very few people getting promoted in the 7 years from 08 to 15.
right. One of my favorite movies, and Ian and I've talked about it a bunch, is a movie called Margin Call. And Margin Call is a movie that takes place in the last downturn, and it's about a bank who is in dire straits, and they were going to have to fire a bunch of people. And they fire actors and actresses like we really like they fire Stanley Tucci, and Demi Moore finds herself on the outside looking in. But there's this young kid, and someone goes, "Are you going to fire him?" He goes, "No, that guy's getting promoted." Because he's the opposite of the Peter principle. He was underutilized in his role, and he saw something, and he's going to skyrocket up. His economy's fine, even though the broader economy is bad, because he's so good.
And he's also incredibly low cost.
Yeah,
that's the other thing, right? He's not making crap for money, so you can promote him for relatively peanuts during a bad economy, versus the other people that are making 5x what he's making with options. They're the first to go because they're not adding value anymore.
That's it. And what you'll find, and this is kind of getting a slightly askew what we were going to talk about, Peter principle, but during a bad economy, what you normally have happen is you go to your, I call it my life raft. Who's on my life raft? Who are the people who are going to help me get through this bad economy? And you give them more opportunity, typically more pay, and then you get rid of a bunch of other people and you ride it out with that life raft group because they're the best of the best. But in big companies, people have gotten into these roles, especially in good economies, where they don't really belong there. It's kind of like a post turtle. They don't really, why is it there? And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Frank, have you ever turned down a promotion?
The answer is yes. It required a relocation and a move, but I turned down that promotion. Yes.
It was Nashville, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah, and that was probably more based on location than
The
anything.
role I liked. I liked the role in general. I disliked the role for in that division with that company because it was a slightly different company in that geographic location. I turned that down. And then when I was younger, like here we go, the Outback. In the Outback, I had opportunities that were going to be, it could propel me into a career path of being in a restaurant. And I came to terms with the fact that I'm not a professional restaurant person. I'm going to get a different kind of a job. So taking this job doesn't make any sense.
Do you still have that frame with all of your business cards from MBR?
I do.
So Frank has a frame that has like 16 different business cards because he had 16 different titles while he was at MBR. And you can see on it really clearly that almost none of them are taking him up the hierarchy. They're all like sideways where people were just trying to find ways to get Frank the F out of the way. So actually we'll probably come back to that frame multiple times in this episode, especially some of the more specifics of the Peter principle of how people hid Frank like a game of like shell game in New York City with a quarter.
So Ian and I were just getting to know each other. We weren't really even friends yet. And I had just gotten promoted into a big job. And Ian had to leave a company because they were tired of him to come to a new company in order to get promoted. But I had gotten promoted a bunch, the company I worked for. And Ian came in there. He goes, "Congratulations to Frank. You know, he's been promoted like 9 times, mostly lateral."
So I've pretty much said yes to every promotion anyone ever offered me in a big company. Except
if I was you, I would too.
Except for one. I was offered, like late 90s, Six Sigma was the rage, and Jack Welch, that was like his biggest initiative. So it was just ravaging through the company. And I just think Six Sigma is the dumbest ass thing in the world. It's smart in like a manufacturing site because it's about quality and defects and taking defects out, Kaizen, Japanese, all that. I get it in an engineering manufacturing capacity, but from like a workflow business, it was seeping its way into sales, and operations and business. And it just seemed like a big boondoggle for me for people to kiss Jack Welch's ass. And I was offered a Six Sigma black belt position. And so that at the time, that was a very glamorous position, but you had no direct reports. You were just an influence guy. All you did was analyze stuff. And if I would have taken that role, it would have been a perfect example of Peter Principle, because my skills are not sitting around in a spreadsheet and doing statistical analysis all day. You had to be a real number crunching kind of nerdy person to do Master Belt. And so I would have been promoted because I was great in sales to come do a job that had nothing to do with any of that, just for the prestige and a little bit more money. And I turned it down. I remember at the time, they put a full court press on me and really put pressure on me, like, this could really be hurting your career to turn something like this down. And I remember just thinking, like, I will suck at that job. I'll hate it. I'll suck at it. And I'll have no influence. And in a bad economy, that job, it'll be gone. Like black belt, and no startup has a title black belt. So I just kind of intuitively felt that I wouldn't be good and that job wouldn't stick around long. And the truth is, a year and a half later, Jack's gone, Jeff Emmelt's in, black belts were like those jobs were just going extinct like dinosaurs. So I'm grateful that that's the one promotion I said no thanks to, because I just knew I would suck at it, and it went away. So companies, I think one of the big problems and the thesis of this whole book is that companies tend to promote people based on one skill set that is not translatable to the next one, in the most obvious one. And I see this all the time, especially in a consulting business, coaching business, is that you take someone who is a fantastic engineer and you make them an engineering manager. And what made them a good engineer was the fact that they were quiet, kept to themselves, analytical, studied things. A lot of these engineers put headphones on when they come into work and focus. And now you put them in charge of 12 people, where a skill set is being a little bit more extroverted, a good listener, empathetic, someone who's engaged with all of your people, empowers them. And the two couldn't be more divergent. Same with a great sales rep is not necessarily a great sales manager. And I think that's what starts to happen in most companies, why you see such a level of incompetence, is that you promote the best performer into a management role. And what made them the best performer typically are some of the same attributes that would make them a terrible manager.
It's funny. It's laziness, or it's assumptiveness, or a combination of both, that ultimately gets people into these roles that they're underqualified for. And you can see it and hear it in people's conversation, especially around something like promotion. Well, that person's good at this, so they'll be great at managing it. And it's rarely the case. Like, Michael Jordan is the best basketball player ever. He never has been a coach, and he's a shit owner. He's not a great owner. Like, his friendship with Charles Barkley fell apart because of the fact that he's just not a great owner, because he was just so talented with work. And I'll give you a different example of this. Like, I've been on a diet for basically 2 decades. And what I find is, like, I'm attracted to the type of people that have like an 8-pack of abs, but that's the wrong trainer for me. The right trainer for me is someone who's a little bit overweight, not fat, but not ripped, because the ripped person doesn't have the same problems that I have. That person is a genetical freak that I am not, and I can't relate to it. And I think that's what happens in a lot of instances, is you're drawn to like this incredible performer, and just because they can hit a three-pointer or can jump from the foul line, they're going to make a great coach. How the hell are you going to coach jump from the free throw and stuff it in? Nobody else can do that. And I think you'll see in many examples, the best managers were not great doers.
Yeah, that's, if you look across Major League Baseball, most baseball managers in the major leagues played high level baseball. So there are very few Major League Baseball players that didn't play a little bit, at least in the pros, or at least minors, got close. But very few of the really elite managers, over the years had incredible careers. So Tommy Lasorda won a championship with the Dodgers, most winningest coach of the 80s. He had 3 seasons in the pros, 0-4 record, 6.5 ERA as a pitcher. Tony La Russa, I think he's top 5 all time in wins. He played 6 seasons, had a 199 batting average. He struck out 37 times and had 35 hits. Connie Mack, going back to the 1800s, 11 seasons, 244 batting average. I think Connie Mack is the winningest coach ever, at least top 3.
He is. No, he's number 1.
Okay, number 1. So Billy Martin, 11 seasons, 257 batting average. Jim Leland, my favorite coach of the Tigers of all time, career 220 hitter in the minor leagues, never made it to the pros. And I think part of that is a guy like Barry Bonds, Darryl Strawberry, someone who's just an incredibly good athlete that goes out and does it on raw talent. When asked, how do you do it? They don't know how to explain it. They don't know how to explain it. Whereas in a guy who struggled and didn't make it, he had to do every little thing right just to stay in the league, right? He had to do all of the practice, the preparation, the extra reps. So that coach can empathize with anybody on the team, and he knows exactly what it took to just get into the league. He had to do everything right, and he had to be mentally very strong about the game just to be there because he didn't have the physical attributes.
So I think in a business, I think there's a couple things I could go with this, right? Like in joking and prep, you and I talked about the difference between Darryl Strawberry and Gary Carter. Like Gary Carter was a marginal talent catcher and he was probably running wind sprints, and Darryl Strawberry would show up, cocaine, hit 3 home runs and then go party even longer. But in business, I think it's hard to see just inherent talent in any role other than sales, because in business, like just really good people who are really good with people tend to be in sales. And that's the hardest thing to bottle. So you see in a lot of instances, this incredible salesman is going to be made a manager because they're an incredible salesman, but that's being gifted like a Darryl Strawberry or a Michael Jordan. You're just so good with people, you can sell. But that does not relate to something that's transferable where you can teach.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think when you're looking to promote someone, it's less about, I think you've got to have some results. If you're going to promote someone, you can't promote the person who had the worst results because they won't have any respect. The people that report to them be like, they'll assume you kissed ass to get into that job. You have to have some, I think you got to be top 30%. Right? You got to have produced good results, but it's almost never the number 1 or the 2. It's usually like number 3 that gets in there. The people that I think I've got the better track record of, they got results, but they were the ones that always had a line at their door. So like when there wasn't a manager around, who do people go ask questions?
That's a good point.
Like if it's a sales rep who, like the younger guys are he's always taking them under their wing, or if it's an engineer who's real patient and answers questions to everyone, spends a little extra time, sacrifices their own results. Like who informally do people go to when the managers are out of the office? Those are the best people normally to promote because they're obviously respected that they can get results, or you wouldn't be asking them questions. But they're patient enough where they take the time and try to help people. So they're acting like leaders long before they get promoted into the role.
It's almost stated a slightly different way. It's almost like you're promoting the player coach. You're hiring someone into the management role that's already acting in that role. And we've talked many times on this podcast about one of our favorite movies, Boiler Room. And he was saying in a way that was more of a scumbag, but the statement holds: act as if. If you're already acting as if you're a manager, you're probably going to be a pretty damn good manager.
Yep. Act like it. So when you get the title, people just say, well, it's about time they gave him the title. He's been doing that for a year. That kind of person, you've nailed it with the promotion when the office reacts that way.
That's right.
I think also with some of this, Frankie, and you just mentioned, that the last recession and milestones on people's, I think timing's everything. I think a big reason why the Peter Principle happens is let's say right now you started selling homes in 2019. And so you come into that, you're a new home sales rep, and you kill it in 2020 and 2021 in the absolute most blistering hot market since 2004 and 5. And you do really well, and you get along well with management. Everyone seems to like you, and you get promoted to sales manager in 2022.
Okay.
And yes, you have a track record. Yes, you sold well, but you also sold well when all you needed to do was fog a mirror and be alive in the mirror, in the model, and someone would buy homes. So now you do that and a recession hits. And now as a manager, you're trying to teach your reps how to do it in a tough market.
Yep.
You can't, because you don't know, because you were so wind-aided. You were in a sailboat and the wind was just blowing so hard that you looked great. And now you get demoted. Do you even have the skills to sell in that market? So I think sometimes people look a lot better. Their timing, they're fortunate about their timing. When you graduate, I think has a big impact on your career. Are you graduating into a strong market or a weak market? And I think a lot of times it's unlikely that if you've been promoted in a really hot market, that you can regain some of that form, because it was a wind-aided performance.
Yeah, and I think as a skilled leader or a skilled manager, you're gonna realize these things in context. You're gonna see, like, you're gonna be able to really kind of focus in on, when did this happen? What are the underlying statistics that you're not physically seeing on the resume or in the conversation?
I think that's right, and it kind of leads us to your favorite scene in the movie, Michael Clayton.
Do you want me to roll into it, or do you want to?
Yeah.
So this is something that I can state is real for me. So I went to something in the year 2000. It was called Results 2000. I was 25. I went with a bunch of managers. I was relatively new. I was only 18 months out of college. And I remember, like, I was there with Nyman and Groner and like tons of people that Ian knows. And Donald Trump was the last speaker. And back then he was just Donald Trump. It wasn't the president. It was none of those things. He just, really rich real estate developer. And he told a bunch of meandering stories. But one of the stories that he told that still sticks with me 20 plus years later is about somebody whose business went, in the Ian's and mine's favorite parlance, tits up. And then he decided to get back in, and the business was never the same. He just no longer had his fastball. He could no longer bring the magic he brought at one point because he'd stepped away. And in Michael Clayton, one of the things
was Trump's point of don't step away, like stay close to the action. What was his point he was trying to make? I know it's hard to figure out what Donald Trump's points are most of the time, but he probably had
one. That part's still consistent. His point was it was hard to tell the point, but my takeaway was, I don't know if this is what he meant, but as a 25-year-old kid, what I took away was never take your eye off the ball. If you take your eye off the ball and you lose the ability to see and feel and touch things the way that you did before, you could be in a position where you could really be hurt in business. That was my takeaway. It's like, this guy had it all, he lost it, and he was going to try and rebuild it, but he didn't have the same fortitude. And what I can tell you at that point in my career, I had mostly only been promoted at Outback. So I've been promoted like once at NVR. And what it did to me was always make me realize that I needed to talk to people that did the job that I had already done. It really crystallized for me to keep talking to the new person out of college who was going to be a project manager, the project manager who had just gotten promoted, someone who was into the realm of estimating. Be mindful of, you're not in that job anymore. They're feeling it, they're seeing it. And if you want to still be relevant, you need to be able to relate yourself back to them and not just use your memories. Like the worst managers I ever saw, Ian would always say, hey, can I tell you this story about when I was in sales? You haven't been in sales in 20 years. Nobody cares. Like, get somebody who's in it to talk about it. But in Michael Clayton, the scene is Michael Clayton kind of feels like, I don't know where I am. Like, am I in a good spot in my career? Am I in a bad spot in my career? I'm not sure. And that's how we usually feel as people, because you don't know. And the conversations he's having with somebody else is, hey, you found a spot, you found the niche for yourself. And he goes, if you want to say, hey, let me go back and be a DA like I used to be back in Queens and you should have seen me, he goes, let me give you some advice. Leave it there, meaning don't revisit it. You were great once in that role. You might not be great there again. And an easy example is Michael Jordan, the Wizard, averaged 20 points a game. But Michael Jordan, the Wizard, at his best nights was never Michael Jordan, the Bull. And you just can't do that. You can't put lightning back in a bottle. And that's what this means. You can stay relevant in business, which is great, but I don't know.
I love in Michael Clayton where he finishes it off by saying, God forbid you're not as good as you remember, because I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
Right. So, again, it could have been wind dated, when he was a good DA back in Queens. That could have been just the market, luck, got a few cases that went his way. You maybe aren't as good as you remember yourself.
In 2000, my brother got married and we went to New Orleans and we spent the entire trip in this one bar. In 2010, our buddy Lee got married and we were at all these other places. We could afford different things and we gotten older and we ended up back in this bar and we're like, the floors were sticky, the drinks sucked, everything was in a plastic cup. Like we weren't happy there. We were there for like 30 minutes and we all looked up and were like, a decade ago, we lived here. We were different people then. That bar was perfect for us then. We could embrace it. It was us. But a decade later, it wasn't. So like you want to put yourself back into this position, you're not the same person. You don't have the same edge. You don't connect to people the same way. You're not going to be able to do that same thing again, almost certainly.
I love it. So he has Dr. Peters has a whole bunch of funny, he makes up names for different people, but we'll go through a few of them right now. He calls this person the percussive sublimation, which is a hopelessly incompetent person, a bottleneck that management kicks upstairs to get him out of the way and let other people do their job. And so I've actually seen a ton. Frank and I just started going through NVR and just listing names. That was hilarious. When you have 8 layers from the front line to the CEO, right? And that's probably an average Fortune 500 company, 8 to 12 layers between a frontliner and the CEO.
Yep.
The farther away you get from the front line, the less important it is at those kind of underneath the CEO roles. They're normally senior executives, they're presidents, they're executive chairs. And in fact, in a lot of companies, an incompetent president will hurt your company less than an incompetent division line manager. And we start talking about people that, kind of towards the end of their career weren't really adding much value as presidents. And if you'd have taken them at that point of their career and put them back in front as a frontline profit center manager, they would have completely blown it up. But they were kind of hiding in the president role because we had a powerful and strong CEO who's doing a good job, but they were hiding. So incompetency didn't really hurt. The company stock kept going up. You can kind of hide them because their decisions day to day. And I think even goes to show even more, actually, the less they did, the better off everyone else did towards the front line. The less managing they did, the less meddling they did, the less getting involved. So by them just kind of checking out and hanging out in their office all day, everyone else got more productive down the line.
Because those people stepped up because they knew they needed to. They were worried about their jobs, so they pushed. So, and the other thing you kind of notice in this, in a lot of instances, is these roles that really amount to nothing. They're, just VPs that report to nobody or have nobody reporting to them. They all those jobs are dreamed up in bull markets. Like it's a really strong economy and they're like, we can afford it. We can do it. We want to keep them around. They're no longer tied to the balance sheet, but it's like, they'd be a great mentor. Someone could take them. They could take people to lunch. Like this is the idiotic things that come out of people's mouths and they're justifying creating these positions. This kind of goes back to what I just talked about a second ago with Jordan or with the Trump conversation and what Ian asked a minute ago or said a minute ago about the black belt. For me, whenever I saw an opportunity to pursue a career down one of these paths, I was always very afraid to take it because I thought I would lose my relevance. and I could lose my competency in what I was really good at. And my wife is a professor. I won't say anything too crazy, but she's a professor. And the person who is like the provost is kind of like just, he's in his mid 50s, but he comes from a family with a lot of money, and he never was really grounded. And he's always doing these crazy things. He ends up in the newspaper around here because of it, but he became a percussive, it was part of the whole thing we're talking about with percussive sublimation.
And a lot of times with that is, someone screwing up on a line manager job, but they've been with the company a long time. They got personal relationships. They're a good person, but they're incompetent. So by moving them up off of the line manager and making them a regional or a market manager, their manager will just skip past them and go right to the frontline manager to kind of get them out of the way. So it's a way of not having to fire someone that would be uncomfortable. You promote them, and then you just bull past them all the time and skip level right to the front line.
That's it.
His next one is the lateral arabesque. And we had to look up arabesque because Frank and I are not terribly smart, but it's a fancy way of decorating a little bit. So what he's talking about here is an incompetent person who's given a new, impressive, longer title and has moved to an office in a remote part of the building. So you actually, Jeff Bezos, we talked about this in the Bezos, he did that with many of his initial founders that were with him, his initial employees that were really important in the beginning. And as they grew to a big company, they couldn't handle their jobs. So he would give them these fancy titles with no direct reports and no direct responsibility over anything. And they ended up just becoming kind of shells of who they used to be. And most of them ended up leaving because they just felt like they knew Jeff didn't want to fire them. He didn't have the heart. There were only 5 or 6 people, but he just gave them different titles and pretty much banished them, to some remote outpost in Alaska kind of thing.
He set them off on ice floats, which is the term of, I don't have the heart to fire you, but you don't fit anymore either.
So with this one, we talked about how do you know if this has happened to you? Because sometimes you feel like, wow, I got a new title. This is exciting. If you've been given a quote unquote promotion and you've gone from having direct reports, people that report to you, direct responsibility for sales, operations, profit, and now you find yourself with no direct reports. You are just an influencer. Maybe you're told that you have dotted line influence, right? Whenever you're told that this position will have dotted line influence, it's a bullshit position. That's a position that is going to go away in a recession because in a recession, no one can afford dotted line influencers. Titles for jobs that I've seen that go away really fast in a recession. Vertical sales leader, regional VP of sales and marketing, training manager, market manager, business analyst, Six Sigma black belt, brand manager, social media manager. These are the first jobs that get cut when a recession happens. They're luxury positions. None of the positions I just mentioned would ever be found in a startup with a founder. These things happen after years and years of great success where you're just trying to move people around a little bit. And those positions, normally the only thing they have is influence over, their influence in the organization is that they talk to the real boss more than most people. So people are a little afraid of them because they know that they have influence over a real person who makes decisions. So people feel like they have to listen to them, but they're not real positions. And they get exposed as soon as the recession happens. All those positions were real positions in GE and NVR until we hit recessions, and they all got wiped out.
That's it. And one of two things happened. Either the people were let go, or if the people were talented enough, they were pushed into a different role, mostly a demotion. In many instances, they didn't cut the pay, but they would demote you into a different role. Because what you did before this bullshit position that was worthless.
Well, the sad part too, Frankie, is most of them were offered a demotion and didn't take it. They didn't take it because of ego, or they tried it and they failed. And
that's right.
part of that is they lost their edge. They lost their skill set. You talked earlier about the fear of losing your fastball. Because once you lose your fastball, it's hard to get it back. It's hard to just plop yourself back in 5 years later and be the person you were when you were promoted into that garbage role in the first place.
That's right.
So the next one is he talks about hierarchical exfoliation. And so
say that one again. I mean, this is something Ian and I talk about in these terms while we're alone.
Yes.
Hierarchical exfoliation.
Yes.
Does it come with a loofah?
Yes. So this is the case of the brilliant, productive worker who not only doesn't win a promotion, but is dismissed from his post in general. And his theory, Dr. Peters, and there's some truth to this, is super competence is more objectionable than incompetence. And the reason being is if his thesis that most mid-level to high-level management positions are filled by people who have reached their level of incompetence, then those people would feel threatened by a high achiever, a top performer, someone who maybe reminds them of themselves at one point in their career, because their whole job, based on this thesis, is to keep the status quo, to keep their position, even though they know their position's not adding value. So an elite performer would threaten them that they might lose their job, that person might get promoted into their job, or what they also know is that person has zero need for them in that management job. If you're that incompetent as a manager, I've had incompetent managers when I was a frontline worker, and I didn't need them. I didn't need to ever talk to them. And so that might have threatened some of them, that they didn't feel needed by me or necessary, even though I was getting them results.
You and I didn't really talk about this before, but I just thought of it now. There's famous examples, and we're going to get into some of those in a minute, people who's, if you follow business, you've heard of. But I remember feeling this way as a younger person. Like, I remember being a young project manager and feeling like my production manager was threatened by me. I remember a costing manager who was threatened by me. I remember a sales manager who was threatened by me, and they all tried to block me. I had a great boss, and my boss saw that, like the head of the department saw it. And we built a relationship where I was allowed to kind of come to him like smartly and ask questions, because he knew he would give me he would help me develop my career, where these other people were kind of blocking me because of threat. And ultimately I got further up the chain than every single one of them. But I think that's real. I think some people realize, like, hey, this person's talented. And there's one of two type of managers. One manager is, I'm going to champion this person because I'm good enough to get more out of them. The other one is, I'm going to be scared of this person.
It's funny, at GE, when I got promoted into my last role, my two mentors that were above me, when they were pushed out, they never treated me like a threat, but thinking through you talking, I was. I made about a third of the money they made. They both got dismissed, and I was promoted. I was like the guy that you talked about from the movie, where they said, no, you promote him. I wasn't paid shit. They gave me the senior executive role. Now, it was a huge increase for me, but it was still less than what those two were making. They were my mentors, but ultimately I replaced them. And that's part, when I was brought into NVR, I was hired by the CEO, not the president. And the president felt threatened by me because he didn't hire me. And so even though I didn't have anywhere near his experience, I was a threat because he didn't know why I was hired and what I was there to do. And I was talented and I was doing a good job. And the better I did, I think the more threatened he felt that maybe his role might be at risk.
I had a division manager who I reported to, and circumstances don't really matter for the point of the story, but I got a huge raise. And my base salary was actually $5,000 more than his. Now, he made way more in bonus, and he had EBIT, and I didn't have that. He had stocks, and I didn't have that much of it at that point. But he literally was like threatened by that, like to a point where he's like, your base is higher than mine. Like, it became a big thing. And he ultimately was pushed out because you're focused on the wrong stuff. Like, if you embrace those moments, if you've got the goods, things like someone like me or Ian getting opportunity makes you feel empowered to do more. But if you don't have the goods, what you focus on is the young person who might be stealing my job or who's going to steal my cheese. And ultimately you're not focused on the right thing and you get passed.
And I know our listeners don't need more examples than your two heroes, Ian Matthews and Frank Cava, but there's actually some other people that had some relative success that went through this. Oprah Winfrey, highly successful like the two of us. She's done okay. She was fired from Baltimore's WJY TV because she was quote unquote unfit for television news.
The question that I ask you, dear listener, is think of the career of the executive that fired her.
Yes.
My crowning achievement is I didn't promote Oprah.
I fired Oprah. Lee Iacocca was fired by Henry Ford II, and he wrote in his memoir, Lee Iacocca went on to turn around Chrysler, became one of the most famous CEOs right after that, took them out of bankruptcy, made them to put him into first slot. But his quote in his memoir was Henry Ford II didn't want strong guys around him. They made him feel uncomfortable because he was the heir to the throne. He never earned his CEO position. Here was a guy like Iacocca that took it, came out there with talent and sheer will and was talented. J.K. Rowling, she was fired as a secretary for daydreaming too much. And
the last one's the best.
Daydreaming made her a lot of money. And then Walt Disney was fired from the Kansas City Star for his quote unquote lack of creativity. So far from just sharing examples from Ian and Frank's lives, we did some in-depth half-ass internet research for all of you to show you this is beyond us.
Categorically listed as half-ass internet research.
Yes, 100%. So number 8 is the paternal instep. This is where the owner of a family business brings in his son or daughter at a high level with the idea that in time, without rising through the ranks and earning it, he should take over the supreme command. So nepotism for the most part. So there's a whole chapter on nepotism and the Peter Principle. And Frank, where did the term nepotism come from? Speaking of your half-ass internet research.
So this came from popes, old school popes 200, 300, 400 years ago. And popes would pick their nephews and give them roles as cardinals. And they didn't earn it. They didn't raise up through the ranks. They didn't start, building a congregation or a flock. They just so happened to be downline of one of the popes, and the pope appointed them.
How did that work out for the Catholic Church? Things going pretty well for them?
It's been a good run.
Oh, there's a lot of little boys that would disagree with that for sure.
The one that I like the best, and like Ian and I are both self-made guys, right? Like we have school teachers for moms, we have hardworking blue collar dads, and our kids are growing up in a way that we're not growing up. I didn't grow up that way. I live in a way nicer house now than I grew up in. So my kids are growing up in a different environment. And I think about this and I worry about it. But one of the things that you hear a lot is shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And there's different iterations of this. Ian had found the quote that I'll let him say about the Scottish, but it's literally like, the first person builds it, the second one grows it, and then the third one sells it. And it comes down to a lot of these different things that we talked about. Like if you really just want to spend your time at the country club, you can, but you don't have the edge that it takes to grow it. Ian and I were half joking about country clubs earlier. Like I haven't joined one for that reason. Like, I don't know. I just don't know what it does to my head. Those are the little things that you kind of look at with nepotism. You got to be very careful with it.
And that shirt sleeves, there's pretty much a saying in almost every culture that's pretty similar. In Japan, it's rice paddies to rice paddies in 3 generations. I did not make that up, so don't cancel us. In Scotland, it's the father buys, the son builds, the grandchild sells, and his son begs. And we talked about Ford earlier. Ford's a really good example of, that's always been, the Ford family has always been involved in that company. And obviously they've had their problems from when Henry Ford started it all. But even the Fords who now own the Lions, Detroit Lions won the NFL championship in 1952, 1953, 1957. Since 1957, They have only won one playoff game. They are the worst football team in all of the NFL since 1957. And it just so happens that in 1963, that's the year the Ford family bought the Lions. And so nepotism has kind of run the Lions right into the ground. Sticking in Detroit, Stroh's was the #1 beer in the 70s and 80s. It was, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s and you remember the ads with Alex from Stroh's beer was the beer. And they went, there's an awesome book, it's called Beer Money. They went shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. They went bankrupt because the family destroyed the business. They let Budweiser and Miller just blow right past them. Another one is Gucci. Gucci founded that company. He blew it up, made it big, made it worldwide, gave it to the kids and grandkids. They squandered it. And so, you know, and now there's no one left in the Gucci family that owns Gucci. It's just a brand. That kind of all ended with Maurizio getting blasted by a hitman because he took his ex-wife out of the inheritance. But it's all over. You see nepotism kind of moving back and through, and it really, you see it as much in small businesses as you see in big corporates.
A couple things that come to mind in thinking about this: real life in Hollywood. Real life, same thing, exact thing that happened to Gucci happened to Adidas. Adidas and Puma were two brothers. Adidas was incredible. They had all these innovations. They could never get their shit together on how to run it. And, you know, now they're a brand, but they've had been resurrected several different times. I love the show Billions, and I've gone back and rewatched some of those episodes, you know, during COVID. And in like the 4th or 5th episode of the whole entire show, it's, you know, the protagonist Axe going after a family who treated him poorly, and everybody was broke because they didn't grow the family money. And Ian loves the Succession, which I haven't gotten into, but basically the entire show is around, you know, the paternal instep or nepotism, and, you know, how do you handle it?
So, you know, outside of nepotism, Dr. Peters talks about the concept of push versus pull, and he believes that pull is the easier way to rise up the ranks. So push is when an employee works hard and delivers to achieve a promotion, and that person is often blocked by incompetent people above them. But more frequent, people get promoted by pull, which is when you have a mentor or a patron who pulls strings to move you up faster. And Frank and I were kind of talking about this. We like to believe that we got results, and we did. You could go objectively look at where we were ranked at anything we were doing. But there were also always people that were performing at, near, or a few above us in any role. I wasn't #1 at everything I ever did, but I always had an influential sponsor. And that was by design. I always paid attention to who makes decisions in this company, and I made sure they knew what I was up to. I made sure they knew what I was doing, how I was doing, and I made sure to have a personal relationship with them because I knew that's who was going to ultimately make the decision.
I think in life, there's either or and. And what I see with push-pull is and. If you're pushing and you also you make the right relationships, or you do the right things career-wise where others will pull for you, you're going to put yourself in the best possible position. And the reason that I had people pulling for me is because I was trustworthy. I was reliable. If a moment came to be called on, I would step up and I would do what I was asked, and I would go above and beyond what I was maybe required to do. So that builds the pull. I wasn't born with pull. I earned the pull by all the push. And if you put those two things together, you can really make some magic.
I love it. So his concept of final placement, this is the main point of his thesis, is that people find that level where their incompetence is truly showing, where they just can't go any farther. That's the highest rung. This is the concept that everybody has a ceiling. And he believes that. He believes everyone has a ceiling. You might just not have hit it in your small little company, but you've got a ceiling somewhere. And I believe that. I believe there are some things I could not do. I'm cool with it. I've kind of come to grips. As a younger person, I thought there was nothing I couldn't accomplish. Now I think most things I couldn't accomplish. I just have to pick things I'm good at. But that's the concept of there's a final rung that based on your skills, and you're always one rung too high. And, he talks about some of the psychological manifestations of final placement. There's self-pity, where people start to say, nobody appreciates me. And then there's the Auld Lang Syne, where he talks about there's a tendency to reminisce about the good old days. One thing I've definitely seen of someone who hits final placement, especially in management, is this kind of stubborn insistence on routing every piece of business and decision through a strict hierarchy, through every line of the organization chart. And I think some of that is they want to make sure that everyone knows that their position was needed. And so everyone has to go through the hierarchy. And whereas in someone who's not hit the final rung, they don't really care who made the decision. They just want results. They're still climbing.
I want to dive into this one a little bit. And instead of like the rigor cardis, right, which is the strict rungs, what I noticed with people who are recently promoted in some instances is they want to control things. Like they want it through a spreadsheet or an org chart or through control, or they want to control the narrative. And like what they want to do is they want to share less, and they become kind of bastions they stop information flow. And what you realize if you become a senior level manager, you get, a business owner like I am, you see people doing that, and it's instinctive. But what you're doing if you decide to be a trap or no longer be a cog, you become a weak link by holding so much power because others can't build off of you. And what you want to get to is the point where you become a conduit. You share those things. It doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you stronger. It makes you more powerful. It makes you more hard to replace because so much things can flow through you and others can build off of it. And that's what I think happens in a lot of these roles. People reach their Peter principle because they don't adapt into the new role. They use the old things, or they have these psychological rigors that keep them from allowing them to continue to be a conduit. You get too big for your own press clippings, and it stops what made you special.
He talks about the teeter-totter syndrome, which is just a complete inability to make decisions appropriate to your rank. And so he talks about how when you get to that position, when you don't have confidence or you're not competent enough, you won't make decisions. I believe part of that is if you never make a decision, you can never get blamed. And so you can never get fired. I think there's a fear that creeps in I'm not good enough to be in this job. So I'm going to just stay under the radar. I'm going to not put myself out there. I'm going to just agree with everything. And so he kind of says they either push everything down. So everything's put back down to someone beneath them. So if something goes wrong, I can always blame someone who reports to me and replace them if it doesn't work. Or he passes it up. So he examines it until he finds some reason why he can't make the decision. And then he pushes it up the chain. And where that gets frustrating as an employee, that's somewhere where you bring good ideas to your boss. And he always says, well, that got shut down in corporate. That got shut down by my boss. That got shut down by the CEO, because he doesn't have the guts to make a decision. He puts it all on his boss or her boss, or he just kicks it out and never makes a decision. He creates committees. I've worked for a boss like that. We just had meetings to talk about meetings and never made a decision unless literally he would need to get 15 people to sign off before he would make any decision. It was so frustrating, but he was scared of being questioned what kind of decisions he would make. And so I have definitely seen at high levels people that won't make decisions, and it's just because they don't want anything ever coming back on them that could be considered heat.
Yeah, I think decision making is one of the most critical aspects of business success. And then there's two elements that go into it. It's tactical knowledge and an ability to make decisions there, but it's also emotional intelligence that goes into it. And if you've gotten to a point by being a bad or a lucky decision maker, raising up through the ranks is going to expose that. Where if you are a great decision maker, you're going to probably elevate incredibly high, because that's what CEOs do. CEOs synthesize information and they decision make. They aren't procrastinators. They're not bad at that. That's why they go as high as they do, because of being able to synthesize.
And I think all of these behaviors is why companies don't act on these managers or executives that have reached their level of incompetency. I think they become very good at hiding in plain sight. They're good at turning invisible, like cockroaches that are just great at finding the dark when the light comes on. There are people like this all over the organization that are just survivors, that everyone knows they kind of suck, but they always kind of survive that last layoff. They survive getting fired. There's always someone else. There's always one fire burning hotter than theirs. It's kind of like that guy that said, "You kept me till the end, Frank."
I just thought of that.
Like they're just always make sure that there's someone who's in more trouble than they are, and they just stay out of that. Like it's funny. I know an executive right now in a company that was always 5th or 6th out of 6 regions. And I just found out he got promoted to some special projects. It's hilarious. It's like he was about to get fired when I left 4 years ago, and he's still not been fired, still performing lousy, and they just gave him a special project because no one wants to deal with it.
It's the methodology of this. In order to not get eaten by the shark, you don't have to be the fastest swimmer. You got to just be faster than the slowest swimmer.
That's it. That's it. And
Just
so they
stay
take no
slightly ahead.
risks. They take no risks. They're awful to work for. They won't take a risk. They won't make a decision. They let others blow up, including their own people first. They'll eat their own young to stay in this job that they know that they're not qualified for.
It's selfish.
And they also know in their head, I couldn't leave here and get this same job somewhere else. I got it because I knew a bunch of people that pulled strings, but my qualifications, I could not get this job. And if I did get it, I wouldn't perform well.
Yep.
So they just get good at never going against the grain. You hear them saying, we need to all get on board with this decision by corporate. And I hear you, but we're not going to change anything. They're just miserable to work for because they don't have the people they work for. All they're trying to do is stay alive and survive in the company. And fact is, they do. For years, they do. And I think there's so many of these shitty senior executives, they stick out more because more people know about them. But the truth is there's just lots of shitty employees all over companies. So most managers are not good at firing people. It's uncomfortable, it's awkward, and that goes for CEOs. I mean, I know a lot of C-level people that are just not good at firing people. So the way they fire them is they make them feel uncomfortable, or they don't give them stock options when everyone else got them, and that's the way they send a message, or they have someone in HR go do the firing for them or push them out. And sometimes it's ego. Someone in a C-level position doesn't want to have to admit they made a terrible decision because their whole brand is built on being a good decision maker, and making a bad promotion is admitting that you are not a good decision maker. The guy I just talked about, that's 100% the reason why he survived for 3 or 4 years, because president promoted him from outside the company and it was a bad hire and he didn't want to admit it, even though the whole company could see it. Or sometimes that, that manager might just be too close to him personally to do anything about it.
Yep. Let's go to the next one.
So how does a company fight this principle? If this is prevalent everywhere, I've talked often about it. Jack Welch saw this all over the place in GE, and he just made it real clear cut and dried. Every single manager had to fire 10% of their team every single year. And that seems draconian, but I've talked about this before. Every year I had 10%. It actually wasn't that hard. There was always 10% on my team that I kind of knew aren't going to make it. And it wasn't really that hard for me to go find them every year. Netflix does the annual keeper test. They put every manager through this, where their manager has to pitch to the CEO that if that person gave their resignation, would they fight to keep them? And a lot of the reason why Netflix executives lose their job is because they become irrelevant. The market changes. The guy that was good at peddling DVDs for Netflix might not have been the guy to take them into the digital revolution. So sometimes you just haven't stayed relevant enough of where the market's going. And then the last one is the Kravitz system, which is Paul Kravitz was an attorney, ran one of the largest, most successful law firms in the country, and he came up with the up or out philosophy, which is every year they would look to see all of their employees, and if you haven't advanced periodically, they would move you out or reassign you somewhere else into the hierarchy.
I've never experienced this the way that you did. I don't think NVR was revolutionary with this process, but I can tell you there's a different theory in my business. Every penny that's spent is mine. So when it's your money that's at risk, you very quickly realize, do I want this person on staff or not? And that's part of it. But as we grow, what we have to be very mindful of is not lowering the bar and just taking and hiring for need over, you just hire someone for convenience because you have a need. You have to still be true to your disciplines. But these are growing pains that you start to feel with companies. Like we're rounding the corner on 50 employees now. It's very different than it was when we had 10. But there needs to be a process. People need to be evaluated, and you need to make sure people are continuing to add value.
The Peter principle is much more prevalent in big companies than startups. So
I agree.
I'm wearing my Keep shirt. It's a tech startup. And we took $4 million from friends, family, private capital. We took money from Frank Cava. And we have 8 engineers. Frank, we've had 8 engineers now just for a few months, but we've had engineers for 2 years. We started with 2 or 3 of them. We've already had to say goodbye to 4 or 5 of them. This is a year and a half. And the reason is what the skills that they helped us with early when we were hiring, they helped us get to a certain level, and they no longer can help us the same way. And when you look at cash burn every month, when you take $4 million from friends and family, we are looking at that cash burning every month. And David, our CEO, has to be very honest. Am I spending other people's money wisely?
Yep.
Right? And in a big company, money just kind of sloshes around. There's lots of cash. You don't think of it that intensely. But every other month, we're kind of thinking of our team and do we have the right team? Are we spending money smartly? And the answer is no, you make changes.
That's it. And you're never perfect in these things. Like you can't, you're not like, even when Jack Welch would fire the bottom 10%, like if he was so good at always getting rid of the wrong people, like you wouldn't have to do this every single year. This is a constant process. People either getting better, staying the same, or getting worse, and they can change minute over minute, day over day. And you just have to be mindful of it. You don't want to fall into the trap of being so bloated as a business that you have tons of these people on staff, because that's unhealthy. And you as an employee, to me, I don't want to be one of these ones who's looked at as that's a luxury hire. I'm potentially 6 out of 6. Like that's never been my goal. And but if it is, you kind of have to pick your spots.
So let's finish with 2 questions, Frank. Try to answer them to see if someone thinks about it. So if you're listening to this and you're not sure if you've petered out, you're not sure if you've hit your level of incompetence, these are some signs that might be. So I think if you're too afraid to push back on your manager, to disagree with your manager in a meeting, to take a good idea from your people to your manager because it might not work or you might be questioned, there's a good chance that you've reached your level of incompetence. If you push agendas that you don't believe in, right? If your manager tells you go roll this out and you don't believe in it at all, and just blindly, without arguing or without pushing back, you just roll it out and say, because that's what we're being told, or let's just wait this out and see how it goes, you've probably petered out because you've lost your will to fight. And right now you're in survival mode and not thrive mode. You're not trying to grow anymore. You're just trying to keep what you have. If you're working for nothing more than your next bonus, if you're literally hanging around to get check after check, if you're working for money and that's it, and you can be honest with that, you've probably petered out. I don't know if you could think of any others, but those I think would be signs to me that if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably reached your Peter principle level.
I would also think when you get promoted into something, there's always a discomfort in that role. Like that's honest. Like, even though you were great at something else, you get moved into a new role, there's discomfort in that new role because it's a new role. But that usually goes away after weeks to months. If you've been in the same job for 3 or 4 years and you still have the discomfort, you're in the wrong spot. If you're still surprised in the role that you're in and you've been there for a while, that's another indication to me that you're not embraced. That job's too big for you. Like in sports, they always talk about when you change from high school to college or college to pros, how the game gets faster. And like, if you go back to, we used baseball earlier, if you go back to when Barry Bonds was the best baseball player on the planet, what he talked about is the game got slower for me. Now, he may have used a crap load of steroids to get slower, but he could see things and he can anticipate. And he was in his 30s when the game was great for him because of his experience. But if you're one of these managers that have been in the role for a while and it's like you still can't keep up, like that's a telltale sign to me that you've reached your Peter principle.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, that's me, what can you do about it?
So I think there's a couple of things you can do, Ian, and I'll let you kind of go through the stuff we have scripted. I'll go off script, but what I think is you need to be honest. Do you want to roll up your sleeves and get to know it? Do you want to be 6 out of 6, but be charming enough where they don't let go of you? I think you need to know where you're at, and you need to be just honest and proactive with it. And if you found a niche and you can continue to ride it, then do so. But what I see, this is the push versus the pull. This is, if you're going to continue to just be in that spot, the tides are going to affect you. You're not going to affect the tides.
I don't know many people that are in these spots that are incredibly proud of coming to work.
Yeah.
I think it's a bad place to be because you feel like you're always the wind turning away from losing your job.
Yeah.
You can't be proud. You're not thriving anymore. Holding on is miserable. I can't imagine a lot of people that are here that are very happy with themselves or proud of who they've become, because you feel like you've lost all of that hope and drive and heart that you had early in your career. So you can embrace it. Just say, okay, I'm at my level of incompetence. I'm pretty lucky to even be in this job, and they're paying me a shitload of money. So I'm going to sell out as long as I can and put it in the bank. But God, that's miserable. Like, knowing that it's miserable, having to show up for it. I don't know that a lot of people that would know that would want to do that. So you could start with something small. You can advocate for a big change. You can go to your team and say, if you could change anything in this company, what would it be? And then just make a list of 30 things and think, okay, I'm going to take 5 of these to my boss. I'm going to go advocate for some change and see if that doesn't re-energize me and re-energize my team. I'm going to go show that I have some stones. I'm going to go show some inner fortitude and go advocate in this company and quit trying to just placate my manager all the time.
Something else that just came to mind for me too is, let's just say you don't want to do something radical. You don't want to change careers. You don't want to go to a different company, but you're like, you know what? If I'm being truthful and honest, and I think all this starts with honesty, but I don't want to be just a stooge anymore. I don't want to be in this spot. Enrich yourself. Invest in books, coaching, classes, do something. Find a business coach that can help you. Like, spend some time, research, and energy into getting what it is that you don't feel like you have to be a success in that role. And what I will tell you is, this is my experience, and this isn't something we talked about, but I'm curious what you think. What I can tell you is, most people who make it to a managerial role or who are in a position of reaching their Peter principle had value at some point. Maybe they weren't the best, but they certainly weren't the worst. As a field person or an entry-level person, they showed some competency. Now, it may have been a while, may have been a couple of decades, but there's something there. But if you push yourself and you ask yourself to produce a little bit more, and you hold yourself to that level of accountability, the beautiful thing about big companies is they're big companies. Things can fly through the cracks. You could be one of those few people who resurrect. they're like, wow, did you see the turnaround with so-and-so? Because all it takes is just a little bit of initiative on your part. And you probably have enough insight into the job to make a couple of screw turns and really make some big difference.
And whatever fear you have, I think you'll find that it's irrational and that the worst case scenario is nowhere near what you think it is.
That's right.
So even being asked to be reassigned into a different division, something that'll re-energize you. You don't have to do something as drastic as moving to a new city, but that definitely will re-energize you if you move to a different part of the company, a different role, and if your company is just something you can be, you can change industries, you can move from big company to small company, or move from small company to big company, just something that feels different. But man, it's miserable trying to hang out for 15, 20 years until you get to, a retirement. You could start a side gig. So you keep your job that you're not energized about, but start something small at night and see if you can go build something. We have a couple of people, Frankie, that are senior executives that are kind of just bored at their jobs, that have invested with us in a number of our real estate deals. And
Sure.
they're doing that to learn, right? We're going out with one of them. He's already come around, looked at different properties. He wants to learn about different things that are out there. So he's investing his own capital alongside of us, but also asking us, can you take me along? Can you show us some of that? It's a way to get re-energized, to learn maybe this is something I could do after the fact or alongside of it. So I did that personally when I was at MVR and I invested in Code Guard. Part of it was just to feel something different than I was feeling every day doing my corporate executive job. So it could be that you invest in something alongside someone that teaches you a new industry.
There's empowerment in opening a book, in enlightening yourself in some way, in doing little things. Like the worst case scenario is the world spins right off its axis, right? Like it's unlikely. Your world spinning off its axis could be you lose your job and you can never find another job again. But that's unlikely. It's insanely unlikely. And if this can light a little bit of a fire under your ass, you're probably going to reinvigorate. But you could do it in ways where you don't have to lose that job by simply just embracing a little bit of a new kind of energy into your routine, into what you're doing.
Frankie, I think we still have it. I think we kept all of our skills. We stayed sharp. 2.5 weeks of eating feta cheese and tomatoes in the Greek islands did not ruin my ability to keep you in check for an entire episode.
It's true. I'm going to do something and infuse my day by hanging up on you.
That would be fantastic. Hey, for our loyal listeners, if you feel like we have not reached our level of incompetence, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Reviews and hit subscribe if you're new to this. We would really appreciate it.
For sure. All right, Ian, good seeing you, buddy.
Good to see you, son of a bitch.
Take care.